Hey, welcome back. NOTCAST 338, whatever number it is, but getting into the big numbers now. And it's Tuesday. It's like Christmas, the bit where you forget what day of the week it is and you only know what day of the week it is because you can hear the neighbours putting the bins out and you kind of go, I've been bin shamed, I now need to empty the bin. And you kind of go, Thursday, right? Well, today is Tuesday, 28th of November, 2023. And I am going to be talking about yet another band that I like, as per the title of the episode and the introductory thumbnail, but not the t-shirt, because I like to shake it up a little bit. I am talking about Flaming Lips and their first post-Warner Brothers years, 2012, 2011, the period which saw the 24-hour song skull, a song a month, all kind of weird and unusual releases. And generally it was difficult to be a fan of the band during this period. And I definitely haven't got all the physical releases because some of the physical releases are really difficult to get, really expensive, and you could only buy some of them at a certain particular gig, which of course I didn't go to because it was in America. And I haven't been to America since 2008. So there you go. So these are the four physical vinyl releases I've got from this period. And also, I've got a couple of these on CD as well, because CD is still a format that sells, despite what your vinyl fetishists want to tell you. They say, vinyl's outselling CD. Well, of course vinyl's outselling CD in terms of pure numbers, because a CD costs about £12 and a vinyl album can cost about £31.99, which means you only really need to sell about a third of the number of CDs in order to make more money out of vinyl. And everyone goes, vinyl, whoa. Yeah, vinyl is... I totally get it. I understand it. The need for a big, tangible, portable work of art that's mass produced. I mean, the idea of a CD is basically these are MP3s in a box, aren't they? And sometimes people kind of look at those and kind of go, it's not worth the money because it's just MP3s in a box. And of course, immediately replicatable, if that's the word, or replicable, maybe that's the word. Whereas vinyl obviously is more difficult to manufacture. Most people don't have their vinyl pressing plants at home. Lots of people, at least in ye olde days, did have a CD burner and a colour printer. So you could easily kind of produce your own, basically at-home version of a CD version of an album. So maybe that's why they wanted to shift people towards vinyl, is to make it the idea of something that you can't produce at home, something you can only get in the store or from the show, or perhaps buy from the band's website. So 2011, so the last Flaming Lips episode I talked about Dark Side of the Moon, which came out, depending upon what format you got it from, 2009, 2010. We saw the end of the band's Warner Brothers deal in 2010 with the Dark Side of the Moon release. And the Flaming Lips were expecting Warner Brothers to renegotiate a deal, come up with another idea, and so the band were fully prepared to do that. But I think Warner's just let it go, whereas the Flaming Lips were eager to explore the possibilities and the options that had been afforded to them by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers perhaps were going, well, this is not a band that we make a huge amount of money out of, or not a band that we make enough money out of. And then there's an element where they have a discussion around effort versus output, reward versus risk. Is it worth paying in advance to a band now that nobody's really selling records? What kind of advance would you sell? Would it be big or not? Or would it be small or tinsy wincy, tiny? Yeah, it'd be tiny if it'd be anything. And I think Warner's didn't renegotiate or extend the deal, so the Flaming Lips found themselves, despite having their biggest selling American LP, without a label, which is a bizarre state to be in. Much the same similar position as Pop released itself in January 1993, being the first unsigned band to appear on Top of the Pops in the UK, because they'd been dropped by their label due to poor commercial performance, yet had a Top of the Pops appearance about a month afterwards. Strange position to be in, but life is strange, isn't it, as the song goes. So with that in mind, and with the band being mercifully unencumbered by record release schedules or anything like that, is that they had effectively a commercial reputation, commercial profile. They had the ability to be completely self-autonomous or autonomous, completely, self-directed, self-financing, with a built-in fan base of a certain size that can sustain a band of a certain size at a certain level. Not, mansions at the top of the hills kind of level, but reasonably well off, and it's certainly probably better than getting an office job. So looking at it from that point of view, maybe they're having the best of both worlds, to quote the mighty Van Halen. And so with that in mind, everything was possible and nothing was impossible. The first thoughts that they had were that they could release a song a month. Then they were, well, let's do a record a month, an EP a month. And then that kind of mutated into something else, with the first release that they had of 2011 being somewhat bizarrely the kind of the as Wayne described it, a Zarika for iPhones, a series called Two Blobs Fucking. What a strange name for a release, but effectively 12 videos simultaneously uploaded to YouTube, which could be played simultaneously on up to 12 devices or in 12 tabs, that then would create effectively a similar kind of sequel to Zarika, but a song-length version of it. And I must admit, I've got no memory of Two Blobs Fucking. It's a strange and unusual title. It's probably pretty good, really, because most Flame Lip stuff is never bad. Some of it is perhaps less immediate than others, and some of it requires more work than some of the others to truly grasp, but it's never bad. And it was 12 YouTube videos that had to be played simultaneously in order to get the full effect, in much the same way as Zarika had those 4 CDs that you had to put in the 4 CD players and play them simultaneously, and everything was, because you were pressing play like a fraction of a second later amongst everything that was ever so slightly out, so no two performances or no two experiences of it were the same unless you put it into a mixing program and created a multi-track out of that. So that was February. And bearing in mind that the band didn't have a label, there was nobody that could sit down and go, no, you can't do that. You absolutely can't. So some of their ideas got pretty fucking crazy. March saw the release of a 12-inch collaboration EP with Neon Indian, which has Is David Bowie Dying?, Alan's Theremin, You Don't Respond, and Do You Want New Wave or Do You Want Death on. And that was a 12-inch, probably only sold at a show or maybe a select number of select indie stores in America. I looked at how much it cost to buy. I decided against it because the answer was a lot and it was difficult to get, and only stores in America had it. So I kind of thought, at this point, and bearing in mind some of the releases I'm about to mention, and I can't show you the releases because I simply don't have them because they're difficult to get, they're expensive, and sometimes visually unimpressive. Being a fan of a band started to become really hard. Being a fan of the band should never be this difficult. It felt like it was like the record collector scum version of whack-a-mole. As you sat there going, okay, what new release are we going to have this month? How crazy is the idea going to be? And what's going to happen with that? And how much is it going to cost? And can I afford it? And could I get it? And if I was able to buy it, could I even get it into the country? Because the release in April was a $150 gummy song skull, which was a USB stick inside a £7 gummy bear, which is in the shape of a skull. And I don't know what the importation rules are around importing a £7 gummy song skull. Pretty sure that the customs people look at it and go, you aren't importing that, mate. There's a risk. In much the same way as, for example, you couldn't really import animals. They had to go into quarantine for 6 months to make sure they didn't bring rabies over with them, for example, as dramatised in the unforgettable 1983 BBC show The Mad Death, which had a lovely title and is really quite terrifying indeed. The £7 gummy bear song skull kind of had the idea that you had to eat your way to the music, which means if you wanted to experience what was on the USB, you had to carve your way through this huge kind of gummy bear thing. And I was just like, really? That's kind of difficult. What a waste of $150 if you want to keep it. And, some record collectors, like me, don't tell anyone I am. We don't necessarily like to break the shrink wrap on the releases. We kind of go, well, actually, if there's a download code in it, we'll have the download, and we've still got the shrink wrapped kind of version of the album. Although this, of course, is a slightly different release from the same period. And so the Gummy Bear Song Skull, I think, had a number of songs in it. One was Drug Chant, one was In Our Bodies, Out of Our Heads, Walk With Me, and Hillary's Time Machine, which was, it's okay. I've downloaded it all. It's all available on YouTube or at various places on the internet if you don't have $150 and a huge penchant for eating 7 pounds of jelly. I didn't see that one coming. In May, meanwhile, we did get the 12-inch release. Here it is, the Flaming Lips and Prefuse 73, which was limited to 1,000 copies. This features Supermoon, Made Me Want to Pee, Heavy Star Moving, Be Like That, and Guelmo's Bolero. Now, the packaging on this, like the packaging on a lot of their releases around about this time, is spectacularly interesting. So it comes already kind of sealed in this kind of thing that you have to open. It's an experience, it's a tangible object that you need to touch, open, and kind of feel. And then it comes as a sleeve, and you kind of go, well, what kind of sleeve is this? Well, it could be any old sleeve, couldn't it, really? It just says on the spine, The Flaming Lips 2011. And then you go into it, and there's like an inner sleeve there, which again is slightly brighter and more exciting. And you think, okay, that's great. I'll be able to make sense of what's on the disc. No, you won't. That's it. That is the Prefuse 73, and you can only tell which side is which by looking at the grooves. This is three tracks on side one, and this is one track, which surprisingly is only about 2 minutes 55 seconds on side two. Apparently, each one of these patterns is unique, caused by the way in which the various colours were poured into the machine. So that's an interesting, tangible idea. So the idea of being a fan of the band moved away from, well, I've got to own everything, to this kind of fetishization of weird and unusual release patterns, schedules and formats. So it was difficult to be a fan of the band. On the grounds that it was difficult to get this stuff. You didn't know how many copies were going to be made. You didn't know whether you could afford it. You didn't know whether you could import it. You didn't know suddenly you'd turn up to a show one day at some random place in America and suddenly there'd be a 12-inch that would only be sold at that show. So it became, it became more difficult than it needed to be to experience music. Now, from my perspective, as I've said before, I think music is one of the best forms of art. It also should be accessible and open to everybody who can participate to the limits that they're allowed to do so. So that means being able to only buy a particular record at a particular show if you've happen to have $50 or $75 available in your bank account at that point in time is a little exclusionary. Sure, from a certain point of view, it's exciting, it's original. But at the other point of view, it's frustrating because suddenly you kind of sit there and going, what fuckery is this? And then you kind of go, well, if I go to the show, do I risk buying it afterwards? Do I buy it before and then risk trashing it during the show because I'm enjoying the show? Who knows? These are the kind of questions that people are facing, which of course was then kind of defused by the release in June of what's called the Gummy Song Fetus, which is $30, which was a small kind of maybe a fetus-shaped gummy bear, again with a USB stick in it, with Enthusiasm for Life Defeats Existential Fear Part 2, Stevens Moonbow, I think it is, and Squishy Glass. And again, not amazing tracks. I barely remember them. But you think about how much music they put out during this period. 4 songs every month in March, April, May, June, July, September, October, November, and December as well. And it got a little difficult, actually, to just keep track of everything that was happening. And that reminds me, I need to bring a 12-inch from upstairs, which I've forgotten to pick up. Back in a second, kids. After the release in June of the Gummy Song Fetus, July saw another 12-inch, this time a collaborative EP with Lightning Bolt, whoever they are. And that was a 12-inch which featured Working at NASA on Acid, I Want to Get High But I Don't Want to Get Brain Damaged, and NASA's Final Acid Bath, and then a 4th track called I Want to Get Damaged But I Won't Say Hi. Now I'm racing through the tracks on the collaborative releases because many of them got a release later on on an album, which I will kind of mention. In fact, very little of this material hasn't been repurposed in some way by the band. So, for example, September also saw a release called the Strobo Trip, which is somewhat bizarrely a kind of like, if you remember back from the 80s, one of those stereoscopic viewer things, and it kind of gave you a view of two things, and you press a button and the slides would come up, but the slides would be at slightly different angles. Like, whoa, 3D, man, awesome. And it was like that, but it was like an optical illusion that created a stroboscopic color effect that kind of blew your mind a little bit. That came with the USB, and that was 6 hours and 10 minutes of music, by the way. One of which was Butterfly, which has an alternate mix that was released on 2013's The Terror. One called Evil Minds, and then a track called I Found a Star on the Ground, which was only 6 hours long. I must admit, I've never listened to it in one go, because I don't have 6 hours to listen to Flaming Lips music in one go. I don't have 6 hours ever, apart from when I'm asleep. And when I'm asleep, I'm probably not going to be listening to music. So I kind of sometimes think, oh, if I had a really long journey, would I listen to it? And then I kind of thought, no, I wouldn't really. I'd get bored, because 6 hours is a long time. But this was where the band really took their hands off the throats of things and just went crazy with the ideas and just go, what can we do? We can do crazy shit. Let's do it. And talking about absolutely crazy shit, October's release was one of the craziest things I've ever heard of. And this means I have to show you it, but I can't show you the version I'm going to be talking about. I can only show you the Greatest Hits edition, which is called Seven Skies H3. Okay, does that make sense? Probably not. So October's edition was a $5,000 USB stick, which they only sold 13 copies of it. They only made 13 copies, which was a flash drive that was inserted into a human skull. An actual, genuine person became a Flaming Lips record. And the track that was on there was a staggering 24 hours long. And apparently it was the recording of it was a frantic period. So, for example, Stephen Drold, who writes a lot of the band's material alongside Wayne, kind of had all his musical ideas. So if you're a musician and you write and record and release stuff, you have lots and lots of little sketches, kind of like 40 seconds here, a minute and a half there. I think about, so, when you artists doing demo versions, and you kind of go, well, I can kind of hear what happened, but then it becomes something else completely. So he took all of those ideas and with the band, worked them up in the studio, recording as they were going, playing jams. And sometimes they just go, right, let's start, and then they play for like 5 hours solid, edit some bits out, and they go, right, that's a really good bit of music there, or that's a really good couple of minutes there, or maybe that's a really nice hour. And some of it wasn't written, it was just played on the hoof. Kind of like, Grateful Dead or Tangerine Dream or something, being a jam band, but doing it in the studio. And this is something that the band also did with some of their other material from around about the same period, is that they had these jams that they did in the studio, they recorded them, they kind of welded them all together into one 24-hour song that is exhaustive and exhausting. It's a huge beastie. I've never listened to all of it. In fact, I've only really listened to maybe a 12th of it, because there are some fan edits that have taken the endless repetition down and made it, well, we'll make that a minute instead of make that 52 minutes, those type of things. There's a brilliant 100-minute version of it, which I think is on a blog called Albums That Never Were, but I could be wrong, where fans create new versions of albums by either remixing the tracks or editing the tracks around, changing the running orders, throwing in B-sides, or slicing 22 hours out of it to make it only 2 hours long. And Seven Skies H3 then was the track that was on that USB stick. It was also uploaded to YouTube if you ever wanted to listen to it, which, by the way, 128k download of Seven Skies H3, the 24-hour version, is only 3.2 gig. And it's easily the biggest single MP3 file that I have. It's enormous. And this is when you're unencumbered by the physical restrictions of the format, and the only reason it was 24 hours was, I think, because that was the maximum length that metadata in an MP3 could allow a single track to be. If it could have been longer, it probably would have been longer, actually. But when somebody was creating the file shell for an MP3, they probably said, no one's ever going to do a file that's longer than 24 hours because people aren't insane. And the Flaming Lips kind of looked at it and went, hold my beer, or more correctly, hold my tab of acid, and went for a 24-hour song. If you've got 24 hours free and you want to listen to it, go ahead. Probably some of it is awful, probably. Although I know earlier on I was saying nothing that they ever did was actually bad. If you take all of the ideas that you've got hanging around in your head that have been unrecorded and unfulfilled and record them in a very short burst over a few weeks in the studio, and they had 2 studios running simultaneously, so perhaps, Michael and Cliff could be working in one studio, Stephen and Wayne could be working in the other. The producer was kind of tag teaming between the 2, listening to the results and creating together some kind of weird Franken song that was 24 hours long. And it was really testing the limits of the format. The question is, why would you want to be like anybody else? If you're not booked into a label, and then there's no expectations or no restrictions upon what you can do, you can do anything you like. And if what you want to do is a 24-hour song, there is literally nobody stopping you. The only thing that's actually limiting you is the technical limitations of the file and the limits of your own imagination. So then they spoke to iTunes and said, is there anything that can carry more than 24 hours of music? And iTunes said, we can't do that. We can't do more than 24 hours. And the MP3 file format probably couldn't do more than 24 hours either. And that's what became the limitation of HSky 7.3. And the choice, I think, really, which one it is, if I had the choice between being in the mud or being free, I'd go free. And so they'd jam for hours, they'd keep edits parts of it, and then they'd mix it into similar parts so that the song would kind of have a flow and a form. Now, the reason I'm showing you a vinyl copy of Seven Skies H3 is because in 2014, for Record Store Day, the band released an edited version of it on vinyl and on CD. This runs for 50 minutes. This is a legitimate and very good, very strong Flaming Lips record, but it is not by any stretch of the imagination the full enchilada, because the full enchilada runs for a whole goddamn day, and I can't be doing with that. So as with a number of the Flaming Lips releases, there is some text here that kind of gives you an idea of it. So for a week in October 2011, they camped out in Tarbox Road Studios, Coyne and Friedman in Studio A, so Friedman being Dave Friedman, the band's producer, and Drosden keyboardist Derek Brown in the B, and Cliff and Mike Ivins in Studio C, each coming up with parts and running them back and forth and then connecting them like a Hot Wheels track. It says there are 15 distinct sections in Seven Skies H3, and Drozd says it gets real interesting at the 5-hour mark and stays that way for the next 7 hours, although there are 5 or 6 hours of it that I can't even remember. And that's a strange and unusual release. It is most possibly one of the oddest recording concepts that we've got. So the Record Store Day edition, which was in an edition of 5,000, comes on clear vinyl. Here it is. I love a bit of clear vinyl, me. Although, don't forget, kids, black is a colour. So when everyone talks about coloured vinyl, black is a colour too. It just happens to be the default colour, like the colour of the void, indeed. And at this point, the band had expanded a little bit with Derek Brown joining the group on various additional instruments, so guitars, keyboards, bass, all those type of things, as well as being a lecturer at music college in Oklahoma, or Norman in Oklahoma, which is where my ex-wife came from. And I prefer the Flaming Lips these days. But Seven Skies H3, purely on the grounds of its novelty status, should not in itself be relegated from being taken seriously. It feels like a legitimate, experimental, slightly weird album. And at this point, the Flaming Lips still hadn't released an album. So they released, 3 12 inches, a stroboscopic USB stick, and a human skull USB stick, and a couple of gummy USB sticks as well. There's still a little bit more to go by. In November, they launched a release called At Last or At Last is Christmas by an imaginary artist called Imagine Peace. This is again a Warner Brothers release from 2014 of the red vinyl version of it, and it is a compilation of Christmas songs, following on a little bit from Christmas on Mars. So a set of cover versions of Christmas songs, for example, Winter Wonderland, Silver Bells, Silent Night, and a couple of originals, including, by the way, Christmas Laughing Waltz, which is an extrapolation of Jingle Bells, and At Last It's Christmas is an original alongside Do You Hear What I Hear, first heard by me in the Gremlins movie, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, White Christmas, Frosty the Snowman, as also covered, by the way, by the Cocteau Twins, Frosty the Snowman, Christmas Kindness Song, which is an original, and the Christmas Song by Mel Torme. Now, I probably should be doing this in December because it is a Christmas themed album, and I think most artists that make Christmas themed albums are really jumping off the log here. It's not a good idea. I don't recommend Christmas albums at all. I have refused on principle to buy Kylie Minogue's Christmas records, but that's not to say that it's bad. It's just I don't really like them. They feel tacky. Like if you're doing a Christmas album, it feels like you're running out of ideas. Although clearly, in fact, with the Flaming Lips, if it was anything, is that they had too many bloody ideas and they couldn't pick which ones they want to be. To use a very technical phrase there, shit or get off the pot. So in November 2011, before Christmas came, the band uploaded to a streaming site this set of Christmas cover versions, obviously inspired by Christmas on Mars as the jumping off point. And they had one more release in December 2011. It is the Flaming Lips and the Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band with a 12-inch that was sold at a gig in a 2000 coloured vinyl edition. This features the Fear Litany, Do It, Brain of Heaven, and the track At Last Is Christmas. So let's have a look in here, because again, this is very nicely packaged. I'm not going to pretend for a second that it isn't. Got this weird, bizarre, multicoloured thing where you kind of look at it and go, well, what is it? Well, it just tells you on the spine it's the Flaming Lips 2011. And then you have this weird and bizarre inner sleeve, which again probably cost quite a lot of money. And then again, you get this weird picture disc release where you don't actually know what side is what. So this side here is A, and you can tell by the fact it's got 3 distinct groove points on there that tell you what it is. And on the B, you have this here, this version, and as per previous ones, there is a unique kind of pattern that's on each one of them. So each one of these is completely different. Full credits for imagination and packaging, but again, being a fan is really bloody difficult at this point. And had I not found somebody that had bought a copy at the show, moved to England and decided that they didn't want it anymore, selling it, I would never have owned this. This only cost me, what, £20 or something, which is probably what a standard 12-inch costs these days. Although it was a limited edition of 2000, and you can argue that the Flaming Lips probably don't sell that many records anymore, and they exist on a live reputation, with the records being not necessarily excuses, but byproducts of the band's live shows, is probably the best way to describe it. And it's difficult to know what is and isn't a Flaming Lips release anymore, because At Last It's Christmas, officially the artist is called Imagine Peace, which is obviously a line from another song. And you kind of go, well, is it actually the Flaming Lips or not? And then really the only reference that there is to this is that it says produced by the Flaming Lips, and uses imaginary names for people. And you kind of go, Imagine Peace isn't really real, is it? It's kind of a bit like when Garth Brooks did that whole, was it Chris Gaines or whatever it was called, pseudonym album, and you kind of sit there and go, do you actually want to sell records or what? I don't know anymore. And this is where we kind of go to 2012. So we've got all these weird and unusual novelty releases in 2011. It's difficult to keep track of them. Thank God for downloading and YouTube and streaming, because otherwise you wouldn't have experienced any of them. Instead, Record Store Day on, about April 2012 saw the release instead of a compilation of the band's collaborative EPs. Here is the Record Store Day version of that, which got to number 99 in the UK and a number 139 in the charts in the US. So a bit of a drop down from Embryonic, and they re-signed. You could say they resigned, but they re-signed to Warner Brothers in America and to a great label called Bella Union in the UK. Bella Union, run by Simon Raymond, formerly of the Cocteau Twins, based in Brighton, have a lovely little shop, signed quite a few of my favourite acts, including John Grant. Maybe I should talk about John Grant at some point. I think he's incredible. He thinks he's the greatest motherfucker. So, you know, those are elements of that thing. And so Heavy Friends here, Heady Friends. I ordered this off the band's website. This is the Record Store Day 2012 edition of it, and it features a number of songs from the collaborative EPs plus some extra tracks as well. So for example, features 2012 with Keisha, Ashes in the Air featuring Bon Iver, Helping the Retarded to Find God, not a great name for a song, featuring Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, Supermoon Made Me Want to Pee, that was on the Prefuse 73 12-inch, Children of the Moon featuring Tame Impala, That Ain't My Trip featuring My Morning Jacket, Hugh Man featuring Nick Cave, I'm Working at NASA on Acid from the Lightning Bolt EP, Do It by Yoko Ono, Is David Bowie Dying by Neon Indian, The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face, and Girl You're So Weird featuring New Fumes, plus a track that's only on the vinyl edition of this, which is I Don't Want You to Die featuring Chris Martin. This comes in a gatefold sleeve. And it features again a really unusual kind of set of designs. I mean, these colours, I like the rug that really holds the room together, man. This makes you kind of pop and go, well, what side am I actually playing? And I don't know. So you have to end up having to look at, for example, the sides and go, so that says D1, I guess that's side D. That sounds like Chris Martin singing. And you look at this one and go, okay. So that looks like, oh, it says D1, S1, M1, which is disc 1, side 1, and the also, by the way, if you look at the groove inscription here, it says You Must Be Upgraded, which is the first track on the album. So you kind of go with that and the A1 on there, or S1, that's probably it. This one has D1, S2, so disc 1, side 2. It becomes more difficult to be a fan when it's difficult to work out, well, just tell me what side I'm bloody listening to. You know, and I've made the mistake where I stuck side 2 on of a record when it hasn't been accurately labelled, and you kind of go, I have no bloody idea what I'm listening to. What is this song? And you kind of go, is it going to be like New Order that take all their titles after films, and the titles don't have anything relating to the song in most cases? And then what do you do? So this is disc 2 of Heady Friends, the Record Store Day edition. And again, this is, depending on your point of view, this one, and let's just quickly check, disc 1 side 1 is there, and this is disc 1 side 2 there, and again the patterns on here are unique and unusual, and you kind of go, well, there's an element where you're starting to fetishize the presentation of the object over the quality of the music that's in the object. Luckily, the album itself, it doesn't feel in any way lesser in comparison to anything else that's in the Flaming Lips body of work there. It feels like it's a genuine, legitimate, well thought out album, but it's a pain in the arse to get to, and it makes you feel that maybe the album doesn't exist as an art form anymore, which is the way that a number of people think about things. Because what you've got here is, in fact, this is half compilation, half studio album. So 4 of the songs have been on the EPs that have come out monthly previously. 7 of them are new, unreleased collaborations. You then have, depending on who you have, either a Chris Martin vocal or a Ghostland Observatory vocal. And there are 10,000 copies of the Record Store Day version of this. And again, as I said, it got to number 99 in the UK and number 139 in the US. And you kind of think, well, the idea of a album is starting to unravel. An album was really a compilation of material that was recorded at the time. You think about the sheer amount of material that came out at this point, and there's already been, 3 albums that have come out of this period, of course, featuring At Last It's Christmas, Seven Skies H3, and yeah, you know, heady friends there, you kind of sit there and go, is that actually, you know, the albums, or are those albums just, you know, bits that have been stuck together? And you might go, oh, we take one song off one album, we stick it on another album. Does it really mean anything? What is an album anymore? And with the fact that streaming, downloads and all that type of stuff is happening, it then makes being a fan of the band difficult to work out what is and isn't a core track, what is just a random offcut, what was recorded with the intention of going on an album. And, you know, in the days when Warner Brothers would be releasing 4 singles and then be 2 CD singles and a 7-inch picture disc and a DVD or a 12-inch, all with completely different B-sides, meaning that you'd end up with up to maybe 10 different tracks per single, and then you've got 4 singles, and then that's 40 separate songs plus the 10 songs that are on the album, and you end up with each album actually recording and releasing maybe 50 songs. And then you kind of go, well, you've already put out maybe, you know, even on the EPs, let's think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 EPs with 4 tracks on, plus the Atlantic Christmas album, that's an extra 12 songs, plus Seven Skies H3, which is 24 hours. And you end up going, well, you've released something like, you know, 30 hours of, or 33 hours of music in 1 year. And it's difficult to keep track of everything that's going on. And a lot of the songs, I think, would have been B-sides in the previous years when singles were being sold. But since they weren't, the band still were producing huge amounts of material. And I started to think about, well, what do we do next? How do we do it? Do we just stick it all out there? Do we upload some stuff? Do we make some stuff only 12 inches? Do we stick some on a flash drive that's in a skull? Fuck it, let's go for the whole thing and we'll just see what happens. And so Heady Friends was released on vinyl in this cover. And in order to help launch it, the band played 8 shows in 24 hours. Each show was a minimum of 15 minutes between June 27th and 28th, 2002. It was very quickly lapped by Frank Turner's video for, I think it's The Road, where he played 24 shows in 24 hours at a combination of venues, streets, houses, and all that type of thing. So if you want to watch the video for that, that's pretty good too. Luckily, if you are a fan, you then got a retail CD release of the Flaming Lips and Heady Friends, which is that compilation album, which effectively takes that Record Store Day weird release and all those weird collaborations and folded them into what could be seen as one collaborative album of original material. The track listing is almost exactly the same, apart from I Don't Want You to Die has been replaced by a track called Tasered and Maced, which features a narrative by the Ghostland Observatory. And again, this was on Bella Union in the UK, as indeed was Seven Skies H3. And it comes in perhaps a slightly, what feels like a slightly kind of repressed cover there. And again, Wayne on the cover alongside who I think is his wife, but I'm not really sure, who's drawn a smiley face on a toe, and you kind of go, not a very good album cover. But what you do get instead is a really interesting and useful booklet that talks about each one of the songs that's on the album and the stories behind them. So, for example, Supermoon Made Me Want to Pee by Prefuse 2073 with the Flaming Lips is actually a jam session by the Flaming Lips that Prefuse 73 is then mixed and overdubbed and added these extra bits to. There's a track called, I think, is it NASA? I'm Working at NASA on Acid by Lightning Bolt, which is actually taken from a recording of a sound check with Flaming Lips, like mic'd up a sound check that the band played in Norman, Oklahoma. They did a 15-minute jam, and then they took that, remixed it, overdubbed it, added their own material, and then it became a Flaming Lips and Lightning Bolt track. And of course, we've got the track Is David Bowie Dying, which is fair to say you got a very subtle rejoinder in the title track of David Bowie's Next Day album, where he sang, Here I am, not quite dying, my body left to rot in a hollow tree. And you kind of go, oh, you sly dog, you were paying attention, weren't you? And that, only 3 albums and about 40,000 USB sticks. Well, not 40,000 USB sticks, 4 USB sticks and a number of 12 inches is Flaming Lips 2011, 2012. The band were totally off the hook at this point. They could do whatever they wanted, so they did whatever they wanted, however they wanted to do it, no matter how weird or uncommercial it would be. They were, to quote the devil, or more correctly Satan, or evil himself in Time Bandits, mercifully unravaged, or more correctly, mercifully free of the ravages of commercialism, and could do whatever they wanted and could get away with it because no one could say no. And the risk with that is that sometimes you end up spiralling off into this weird and unusual world where people kind of go, you've gone so far, you can't get back. Now, the one release I haven't mentioned is a USB stick that was sold at a show, and it was a June 2011 recording of the Soft Bulletin performed live somewhere, and I don't remember very much about it. It was later superseded by a 2016 recording of the Soft Bulletin Live, which was the second Flaming Lips live album, which when we get to 2016, I will talk about in more detail there. So that is 2011, 2012, when the going gets weird, the Flaming Lips turn pro. And so yes, lots and lots of releases, really unusual ones, really interesting to listen to, absolutely fascinating. It feels like I barely scratched the surface of how prolific and bonkers this period was to be a fan of the band. I did feel a little excluded from participation in that because the material was difficult to get hold of. It was expensive, a bit rich for my blood sometimes, and often, when am I going to find 24 hours to listen to a 24-hour song? Let's be honest, 12 years later, still haven't got round to it. But the 50-minute version of it works absolutely fine. It's a little weird, and it does have a track called Meepy Morp, which is a fantastic name for a song. But you kind of listen to it and go, it's really good, utterly weird, but really good. There is nobody that's quite like the Flaming Lips at this period. Maybe Mike Patton's Fantomas, and as it turns out to be, Mr. Bungle and stuff like that. It's like, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I'm going to trust that enough people are going to buy it for me to be able to carry on doing it. There is a theory that if you have 1,000 fans and each one of those fans is willing to pay you about £10 a month, you're able to make it work. Those are the kind of economies that the band are working on. It's fair to say, obviously sales will have fallen off a cliff because the sales for everybody will have fallen off a cliff in 2011 because everybody's streaming everything, and music as a physical object, you're not chained to having to have CDs or LPs to experience it. At this point, CDs and LPs became a niche kind of experience. I'm well aware I'm not like most people. Other people could kind of really wish I was, or really wish I wasn't like most other people, who knows. But people were no longer chained to having to buy a CD in order to hear the music. You could log into Spotify or YouTube, you watch it, you get about 30 seconds of adverts every once in a while, and that's how you consume music. Is that it's in the air like radioactivity or a tap, which you can switch on and switch off, and almost everything is available almost all of the time. And that flattening of the supply chain around music actually is counterproductive, because what it means is there's almost too much choice. And if a band puts out everything that they record, they put out bad stuff, good stuff, average stuff, and there's no delineation around what they think is actually really good. So now that B-sides don't really exist, you get bonus tracks and you kind of sit there going, is this good? Is this that you wrote too many good songs, or you just wrote too many songs and you couldn't trim down the bits? And it makes it difficult to understand what's the definitive version of anything. Because, for example, you think about director's cuts of movies, and the USB stick version of the 24-hour song is the director's cut of H. Sky's 7.3. This is the cut down TV edit, but it's still magnificent and weird, and kind of sat there going, wow, somebody thought that. And as Stephen Dross said, it was the first time in his career, the first time in his life, when he had no musical ideas, which meant that the next stuff that the Flaming Lips did came from a completely clean slate with no old ideas that could be recycled. And that's a really interesting place to start, because you can't rely on, if I don't write a good song, I've got 8 that I wrote 3 years ago that are quite good. Or if you're Axl Rose, well, I've got 12 which I wrote 25 years ago, which I can just get the new guys to overdub and pretend is a new song, and it isn't, But if your slate is completely clean and empty and barren, The future is completely unmapped and unwritten, and you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you like, which, as this period proves, is a double-edged sword, because there's so much stuff, so much to listen to, and quite a lot of it is utterly bonkers. So that is Flaming Lips 2011. That is Flaming Lips and the Heady Friends. That is At Last It's Christmas. And that is Seven Skies H83. So thank you for watching this far, if you've made it. If you haven't, I can say whatever I like because you're not watching. But some of you undoubtedly are. So thank you, and see you again soon. I don't know when the next one of these is going to be. I have a couple of gigs coming up. I will tell you about those when they happen. But if you're watching this after this week, doesn't matter, does it? They've already happened. They're in the past. And that's the great thing about history, being able to record stuff, is that it makes the concept of history, although time is linear, and memory is a stranger, and history is for fools, and man is a tool of the great God Almighty. Although all those things are true, with the recordings, what it means is that you can actually pretty much revisit any period in history with an exceptional degree of clarity, which means these days I do get confused and annoyed when somebody hasn't put a 4K multicam edit of a show up by 8 o'clock the next morning onto YouTube. I'm like, why didn't you stay up all night and do a multi-camera edit of it and upload it to YouTube so I could watch it? But then I've got to realise is, when I was younger, much younger, if I was lucky, I'd be able to get a bootleg cassette of the show, maybe 6 weeks later, that I could listen to. And here is the bootleg cassette of one of the very best gigs I ever went to, New Order at the Manchester Apollo, 1998. The first show that they played in 5 long years. The first time I saw New Order. And let me be unambiguous about it. What an incredible show it was. And the fact that I can now relive it anytime I feel like it is thanks to the glory of some guy with a tape recorder who decided to not sing and record it in the theatre at the night. So, thank you very much. Thanks for watching this far, if you made it this far. See you all soon, and stay beautiful. Bye.